I remember the first time that I started working on animations. And animations have been a pain point on Android since day zero. It was an afterthought on the framework, and it was dead obvious every time that you would try to do as much as move a single pixel. So I was at a different company back then, and we had one client. It was an agency, and we had one client, and the designer of that client went wild. So someone had to tackle all of the issues that were called animations, and specifically all the Jira tickets that we had stacking up. And no one volunteered, what a surprise. So I was the selected lucky one. And I remember, I was quite junior at that point, and I remember that I was actually feeling lucky because I've never worked with animations. I did not know about animations. That was why I was feeling lucky. Now that was a good 7 to 8 years back, right? So as you can imagine, for those 2.5 months, for 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, I was just going mental. Not that I was counting. And obviously, since I ended up being the only person in the company that actually knew about animations, I had to deal with all of the rest of the clients too later on. Fun times. So today we're going to talk about compose animations. And this is probably the very first time that I am very excited about animations. It's the very first time in the Android history that animations are not an afterthought, but built in the framework and very easy to use. So my name is Elisa Camber. I work at Makoto. Makoto is a B2B supplier to iGaming operators. I am a Google developer expert for the AI and ML, and I live in the land of corgis. That would be London for those that are not familiar. So for today's agenda, first of all, we're going to have an overview. We're going to check some high-level APIs. Then we're going to go a little deeper to the low-level APIs. We're going to check the animations on the navigation and the list items and how we do those. Then we're going to move to the vectors, and finally, we are going to have some time for questions. So for the overview, there are many studies that are in the mobile world, and they all concluded in one thing. It takes about 20 seconds for the user to make up their mind if they like your application or not. That means it's 20 seconds to decide for them if they're going to continue discovering your app, if they are going to switch to the one that they are currently using to yours. And for most of our applications, as you can see, 20 seconds is not that much. For most of our applications, those precious first moments are all taken by some very boring jobs that we have to do, like load our data, sign in our users, update any databases that we have. So what can we do to actually make those boring jobs just a little better? Well, we can add motion. And if we add motion, then at least we keep them interesting and they are not seeing something completely blank. Now, motion can be integrated throughout the whole application. And if it's done correctly, then the user cannot even understand why it's so nice and what makes it so enjoyable to actually use your application. That was meant to happen. Okay, let's hope that it's going to last. Also, it's going to help your users to not just for the first few seconds, but also when you have some blocking actions, like placing an order, for instance, then you can still make it a little more enjoyable by adding some motion over there. Or when you have to upload or download a very big file. Now, when it comes to adding motion, there are only 2 rules. The first one is that it cannot be blocking the user, and it has to be meaningful. So for the blocking the user, obviously, you cannot just block the user without having a reason behind this. And it has to be meaningful as that let's say that we have a button, for instance, for placing the order. Now, imagine that button not having any sort of animations or indicators that that was pressed. So the user will never know if the action was fulfilled or if it's not. So in some situations, we can see that adding some indicators, adding some motion, it's not really just a nice to have, but it's a must have. Now, let's move to the animation APIs. We are going to have them in 4 chapters. So for the first one, we're going to go with the composables and the modifiers. For the other one, we are going to see how we change values. Then we're going to move to the navigation and the list. And finally, we're going to see how we deal with vectors and art. In the modifiers and the composables, we're going to see three items, 3 different APIs. The first one is the animated visibility one. So it appears and it animates the appearance and disappearance of any composable that we have in our application. Then the second one, it's animating content sizes. And finally, the third one, actually, we have 2 options. So the third one is for animating content changes, not sizes, content changes. So we have 2 options over here. The one option is the animated content, and it's for animating content between states on the same layout. And the other one is the crossfade, which is to animate content changes, but that are happening in different layouts, like switching to a different layout. So the first one is a composable, the animated visibility. The second one is a modifier, the animated content size. And finally, we have 2 more composables that are the animated content, the crossfade. Now, let's start with the animated visibility one. As you can see over here, because it's a composable, all we have to do to actually add motion is to encapsulate the one that we already have, the composable that we already have, with this animated visibility one. And then we just provide a flag and say, like, when we want to this to show and when we want to hide it. And this would result to something like this. So without us doing any extra work, we have this. And this is why it's called like the high-level API, because it's basically handling everything for us. Now, as you can see here, the default one is appearing and expanding, and obviously when it exits, the exit transition, it's shrinking and it's fading out. Now, can we do something else for that? Well, yes, we can. We have multiple enter transitions and exit transitions, and basically, as you can see, for every enter transition, there is like the equivalent of the exit. So you have the slide in, the slide out, you have the expand and the shrink, and so it goes on. So how can we use them? Well, back to our code, and we can easily do something like this. So we can manipulate how we want it. We can say, like, if it wants to slide, if it wants to expand, whatever we want. What we can also do, and then it shows like this instead of what we had. But what we can also do is to combine multiple. By just using the plus sign, then we can combine as many as we want. And then if we check them side to side, we can see that one is fading as well, but the other one is not fading. One of the most useful tools is the Android Studio Preview. So you can see here that if we can preview a composable, then we can also check the animations. And you can check any animation that you want for this composable. You can slow it down, you can loop it, you can make it go faster, but you can also just go directly at the exact point that you want. And this allows us to fine-tune and debug the animations super easily. Now, since we're already at the composables, I'm going to go to the animated content, the crossfade, and then we're going to go to the animated content size. Now, as we mentioned, the animated content is for animating in the same layout. So for the crossfade first, as you can see, we have one target state, and then we switch between those two states, those two composables basically, which are entire screens. So that would look something like this. Like as we can see, it's fading the one and the other one appears on top. Now for the animated content, you can see that the code is almost identical. But over here, instead of just appearing and disappearing, it also does some sort of like expanding because the one is bigger than the other one, the contents. And that is because it's providing the continuity that the user needs to tell them that they're still in the same layout. It's not a different layout. But the one provides like that visual continuity. Obviously, you can use the one over the other, but depending on your scenario, you should choose like which one is better for you. So now to our modifiers and the animate content size. And the modifiers are even easier to use than the composables. The modifier is exactly what you think that it would be. Basically, you just add it like any modifier that you have. And this is all that it needs. So you say that you want to animate the content size, and then you basically say like when you want this to be like a different size. And it takes care of all the animations that we have. Instead of just dropping, you can see how easily it's providing some animations to the user. Cool. So now we're going to move to the value changes for states. And for this one, we are not going to stay just to the high-level APIs. We're going to go a little deeper to the low-level APIs. We have two chapters over here. One is if we want to only animate a single value, and that would be, yes, maybe? Yes, thank you. And then we have for multiple values, if we want to animate multiple values and how we do that. So the first one is the animate as state, and it's for multiple ones. Please, thank you. And then we have for the multiple ones, the transitions, and also the infinite transitions if we want to have like a loop. So first we're going to start with this one. We can see that out of the box, we have multiple choices for which values we want to change. So we have over there like floats, we have colors, we have ions, but there is also something really nice. The animate value as state, and that means that we can basically provide any value that we want and the converter, and then it knows how to animate between those two states. So let's have this scenario over here. So we're just changing the color, and we don't have any animations yet, right? So it's gonna look something like this. Just changing the colors, no animations. Now, let's go back to our code, and let's see how we can use the animate color as state. Now, there are a few things to note over here. So we don't really need to create any instance of the animation object, which that would be an animatable. So the animate as state is a high-level API, and that means that it's going to take care of a lot of things that we don't really we don't have to do it ourselves. So we don't need to create like an animation object. We don't care about life cycles. We don't care about interruptions. If there is a new state, then it's going to start and it's going to go towards the new target state. If there is already a transition or an animation, that it's happening, then instead of like starting from the beginning, it's going to take the current value, and from the current value, it's going to go all the way to the target state that we have over here. And that looks a little better, but I think that we can do much better than this, right? So let's go back to our code, and let's see how easy it is to actually animate the transition over there. So we can have those animation spec. We're going to see them all across. And with that animation spec, you can have just one or multiple, and you can very easily specify exactly what you need. So that would look something like this in like the application. And we can also combine as many of those animation specs as we like. For the animation specs, we also have a few options over there. Those are the out-of-the-box ones that Android is giving us. So we have twin, spring, keyframes, repeatable and infinite repeatable, and finally we have the snap. Now for all these, there are also multiple properties that we can change. So you can say like, I want to ease in or I want to ease out, and all of these are very easy to figure out how to do them. Cool, now that we saw the animate as state, let's go a little deeper and figure out how does it actually work. Because we said that this is like a high-level API, but all the high-level APIs depend on the low-level APIs. Now, exactly the same code that we had before, but instead of going for the high-level API right now, we are going to go with the animatable, which is a low-level API. Now, the animate as state under the hood is doing exactly the same thing. So it's creating an animatable object for us, it's remembering it, and then it calls this animate to. One thing to note over there is that we now have extra options. We can have a different starting value than the first value that we had before, which with the animatable, if I go back, you can see that the initial value is the first target value that it gets. You can't have another one. But if we move to over this one, go back a bit, thank you. So if we move to over this one, then we can have like a, too much, yes. We can have a different initial value than the two target values or more target values that we actually care. Now, the animate to and multiple of those are suspend functions. And that does mean that we need to provide with the correct coroutine scope for us to work. What that does do is that it also allows us to keep this outside of our composable. So we don't really need to have the animations objects in our composable if needed. Obviously, since this is a suspend function, we need to take care of life cycles, interactions, interrupting the animations, and all of this. So everything that the animate state as is giving us for free, then we will need to do that ourselves if we go to the low-level APIs. And that is the difference between those two. So you gain something, you gain more options and some more flexibility, you lose something else. Some of the things that come for free, they don't come for free anymore. And as you can see, it's exactly the same. So if you use the animatable and the animate to, it's giving you exactly the same thing that the animate as state would give you. Now, moving to the transitions and the infinite transitions. Transitions are also low-level APIs, which means that, again, we have to take care of a lot of those things. Now, we have an update transition over here, and we can give it like 2 states. We can give it multiple states if we want. So as we saw before, there was a single value for every state that we wanted, right? But over here, you can have as many values for every state that you need. Doesn't matter. If we go to the animate color, they will switch between those two. And what it's worth checking over here is that it has that target state. So with just the target state, that one is now a Boolean. So it checks if it's loaded or not. But it could very easily be something like this. So the target state doesn't really have to be just like a Boolean or an int or something like this. You can go as custom as you want. Now that would look something like this, but I think that we can still do better. You can, again, use the animation spec to change all of the transitions that we had before, right? Now, out of the box, there are a few options, as it was with the animate state. We also have the animate, functions over here. Yeah. So we have the animate color, we have the animate float, we have the animate size, and again, we also have the animate value, which again, if we do give the converter, they will take any value, and then we can use that to animate our objects. For the infinite transitions will start whenever the composable enters and will stop whenever the composable, whenever we stop it or whenever the composable exits our composition. So a great example would be like a loading screen, for instance, but you just need to keep repeating the animation infinitely till you actually kill it. The usage is the same as we saw with the transitions before. So we start with a remember infinite transition, and then you just animate whatever value you want. Here I got the alpha. You have an initial value, and you have an animated value, and then this is going to be animating all the way, obviously, till we kill it. And obviously, we can customize this as well with our favorite animation spec, the same as I told you before. So instead of the tween, over here, I went for the keyframes. So it's going to go for the duration. It's going to change between the 7F and the at 500, and then it's going to repeat in reverse. So you can animate this and customize this to your designs. And those were the basic animation APIs that we have for Compose. And those do cover a lot of our designs, but it doesn't cover everything, right? And one very big problem is what happens when you have custom animations in navigation. Those are between composables, but it's also completely different. So we have a nav host for this, and we need to put all of our code over there. So without the animation, it looks something like this, right? That should be a very familiar code, I assume, I hope. So if we want to animate all of our transitions between our screens, then we need to provide the animations to the nav host. We can use the enter and the exit transitions that we saw at the beginning that we used also for the animated content, or we can have our custom ones that we can depend still on the built-in, but we can customize them if we need. So we can have the enter and the exit transitions, but what happens if we only care about a single composable that we want to change the animation, right? Well, then we can just move those to the composable. Now, can we use a combination of the nav host enter and exit and the composable enter and exit? Yes, we can, but one is going to take over the other one. So if we have in the composable the enter and the exit, and we also have the nav controller, then the ones on the composable are the ones that are going to take over the ones that are on the nav host. So only the bottom ones will show up for the screen, not the top ones. Something else, instead of we can't only have the enter and the exit, we also can customize the pop enter and the pop exit. Those are called every time that the pop action is happening, every time that we take from the nav stack navigation. So basically every time that the back button is pressed. Again, same transitions, some more, some less than the ones that we had before. So over here, for instance, we don't have the slide in container. That would be the only difference, I think, that between the two transitions. And that would be with our transitions. So we have it sliding instead of just appearing from nowhere. Now let's check the list animations. We can see here we add and we delete items, but it's very difficult to actually see which items are deleted, which items are going where, if they're reordered and stuff like this. And especially in a list like this, that it's just dates, you can imagine that this can be very chaotic from a user perspective, right? Like over here, it's just 3 examples, and it's still impossible to tell which one got deleted, where did that one get added, and stuff like this. But we can have something like this. It's very nice. You can see exactly where something was entered, if something got reordered, or where things got deleted, and without caring much. The item placement is a modifier, and we can just add it into our row, the animate item placement, and that would take care of all the animations, which is going to be reordering stuff, adding stuff, and deleting stuff. Now for the reordering, obviously you need some sort of sorting. So you can see over there that I have that key. That key is going to tell it like which is the sorting order for our list. And obviously, we can use our animation spec over here as well. I told you that this is basically backing up most, if not all, of our composables. And yeah, it's the same things as we saw before. And finally, we have art and vectors. Sometimes we have things that are more complex, like After Effects file, for instance, or like some drawables that are moving around too much. We have 3 options over here for the vectors. So we are going to see the last 2, which is going to be like the Lottie. It's a library from Airbnb. We are going to see the animated drawable. And also you can use the image vector. And with the image vector, there is a very nice article. It's from developer advocate at Google. Her name is Rebecca Frank. And she shows over there how you can just use the image vector to make any animations. Now, those animations that are in the image vector, basically what you do is you take the paths of the vector that you want to animate, and you use all of the APIs that we saw before. For the animated image vector, well, not too many things that we have to do. First of all, well, we need the appropriate file, obviously. And then we just need to load it with the animated vector resource. And then we just pass it like this. We also pass the target state that we want, and it will take care of the transition for us. So an example would be something like this, for instance. So you just move it around. And for the Lottie one now, some animations are more complex than some others. Obviously, you can do stuff like this with just the image vectors or stuff like this. But do you really want to go to that direction? I'm pretty sure not. Thankfully, there is a library called Lottie from Airbnb, as I mentioned. It's super easy to use, and it's just as easy as this. That would be a very basic composition, low-level composition. So you pass whatever drawable you have over there. Over here we have our loading. And then it's a composable, so you just pass the composition over there. You can also have a lot of flexibility when it comes to progress. So if you need to animate specific values, if you care about the progress of the animation, if you want to stop it or like pause it or stuff like this, then you can get the progress, and the progress is going to give you the value at that point that you are at that frame. So then you can do whatever you need to do with that. Lottie provides a lot of things. One of my personal favorites that I've figured out very recently, actually, it's also called dynamic properties. And what it does is basically you provide the path and you can change many properties. Like you can change the color, you can change the size. And what helped us with is that we provide that, and then we also provide the colors. And then you don't really need two drawables for theming. You can have the very same drawable and then pass whatever parameters you have for the color for different themes, like the night and the day, for instance. And it's doing all the magic for you. It's still the very same like drawable that you would use. Now that does conclude all of our animation APIs. And I'm pretty sure that it may be very easy to underestimate everything that we've learned so far, but you can now go to the documentation and actually understand this. So everything that we've seen so far, you can code it by using this one. It will give you exactly the path that you need depending on your scenario. Obviously, the first time that you open the documentation, you see this, it's not very inviting. But yeah, now we know how to do that. So thank you very much. And I think that we do have time for questions, right?